I just got everything set up. It took me ages. I just sat down, opened my mouth to start filming, and the doorbell rang and I had to leg it. I'm attached to a microphone to my phone and it just didn't end well. That's all you need to know. Let's try this again. Okay, today I wanted to talk a bit about academic reading with a chronic illness. You might have seen a video that went up before this one. I talked about reading habits more generally with a chronic illness and some of my tips and tricks. And when I asked for people's questions, I found that a lot of the questions that came in weren't about reading for pleasure, which is what I kind of had in mind. A lot of them were more specifically related to studying and academic reading and any tips in that area. So today I want to share a few of my tips in that area, but I also want you to bear in mind that I've been out of education for about 4 years now, which quite frankly is terrifying. I don't even want to think about that. So I did graduate with a psychology degree back in 2016, but the line of work I'm in now does mean that I still do a bit of academic reading. I read research papers, I read long form contributions and industry guidance. So I do still do some of this in my line of work, but obviously not as intensively as I did back when I was a student, and what likely a lot of you watching this right now will be going through right now, which I know can feel like a lot for any person, let alone when you're dealing with a chronic illness and the joys of brain fog. I studied psychology in education, so it was a science degree, so a lot of the work was based around academic reading, essay writing. There was stats as well. Oh gosh, I'm having flashbacks even just saying the word stats. That was not a fun time. It's not been until the last few years that I really feel like I've got a handle on academic reading and reading more challenging texts in a work capacity. Back when I was a student, I think I was just winging it, whereas now I feel like I have a few strategies and stuff. So I'm going to stop waffling, let's get on with it. The first tips I wanted to share are all related to the state of mind you're in, and you're going to have to hear me out with this one because it might sound a bit strange, and I really hope I can communicate this so that you understand what I mean, because I don't even know. Let's just see how we go. With me personally, I find that I have to be in the right state of mind before I sit down to read an academic article or something challenging. And I find that my mind has to be quite quiet so that I'm in the right headspace. So I don't find it helpful to switch abruptly from one activity straight to the other. So I can't be doing another task and then think, right, academic writing, let's go. To get into that state of mind, it will be different for everybody, but I always find it helpful to just have some quiet time, just breathe, don't have any music playing, maybe just get up and go and make myself a nice cup of tea, and just really quieten your mind down. That's the only way I can explain it, and just make sure your mind is nice and peaceful and not buzzing with a million other things before you sit down to even start tackling the article. On a similar note, I also find it really helpful to have a pen and paper nearby so you can scribble down anything that pops into your head. Now, that might be related to the article and the content you're reading, but it might also be just the random everyday life things that pop up at the most inconvenient times. So if you have a thought and you need to get it out of your head so you can focus, just scribble it down so then you know that it's there. You're not going to forget about it, so you don't need to worry about it. You can just put it to one side, focus on what you're doing, and come back to it later. My neighbour's watching me. Oh, he's gone, it's alright. Oh, fun. And the final thing related to state of mind, I know this is so much easier said than done, but I always think it's beneficial to start as early as possible with academic articles. As soon as you're assigned them, I think it's helpful to prioritise the reading over any actual work that you might have. And that's purely because if you start reading an article and you know it's going to take you some time to get through it and to internalise the information, you're not leaving it until the last minute and you're not panicking because you know you've got to get through this and you've only got this much time to do it, which can make you pile a bit of pressure on yourself. Does that make any kind of sense? Just start in plenty of time so that you've given yourself as much time as possible to get through it at a pace that works for you. That was a more concise way of saying it. Now let's move on to tips for actually physically reading the article and how we can make that more accessible. Oh, I sound like a teacher today. I'm not sure I like this. When it comes to physical reading, I know that everyone's going to have a personal preference. Some people might prefer to read things online, other people might prefer to read things on paper, and I was always in the camp of people that preferred paper, so wherever possible I would print out the research paper so that I could read it in that format, scribble on it, highlight it, make notes and all that jazz. However, many articles are lengthy, printing can be a bit of an issue, so if you're able to cope with smaller text, printing multiple pages of the document on one page of A4 paper can be beneficial, and it can also save you some money if you're having to pay for printing at university. Now, in terms of getting through the piece, I think it's really important to pace yourself. I know that keyword again, that buzzword in the chronic illness community, pace yourself. But I really think there's value in breaking the article or whatever you're reading up into chunks. So just tackling things a bit at a time and then giving your brain and your body a little bit of a rest in between can be really helpful. You might feel like it's not the most time efficient thing at the time, but if it helps you to manage your symptoms and manage your condition, then I personally think it's worth doing because it's going to reduce the payback that you suffer later. On a similar note, I think it's really important to figure out what order suits you for academic reading. So let's say that you're reading an academic research paper that's broken up into your introduction, methods, results, conclusion. I personally would always recommend reading the introduction and the conclusion and getting to grips with them before you tackle the methods and the results. And I don't mind telling you that's because I usually got a bit lost with research methods. Reading the methods always seemed to confuse me more. I'm sat here talking about this and I'm just having flashbacks to things like regression and chi-squared and things I've honestly not thought about once since I graduated. Oh, stats. If you're going through stats now, my thoughts are with you. You have my solidarity. Oh no, absolutely not. My next tip, if you're physically reading something, either in a book or something you've printed off, is to read a line at a time by covering the rest of the page with paper. If you struggle with things like sensory overload and you find you can get a bit overwhelmed when you're presented with a lot of text at once, don't be afraid to just break things up by just physically covering the rest of the stuff and just focusing on one little bit at a time, and you can just move it down at your own pace. And my final tip when it comes to physically reading is a bit of a rogue one, but it's something that I do all the time now in my line of work still. When you're reading an academic research paper, if there's any one sentence or phrase that really jumps out at you and you feel is really just a nice summary or an underpinning of the work that you're doing, it can be really helpful to write it down on a separate piece of paper and stick it up somewhere prominent where you're likely to see it, just as you're going about your day-to-day life. So if you have a desk area, just stick it up above your desk. In your uni room, stick it up somewhere. And you'll find that as you just glance at it as you're going about your everyday life, you might find it more easy to internalise the information, and it might, there's probably a psychological term for memory recall or stuff like that, and you'd think as a psychology graduate I would know that, but my brain is blank today, so I'm kind of wishing I hadn't even said that. Just having it stuck up on a wall can be a really helpful way of just internalising the information. I hope that makes sense. I might show you some of mine actually. Now that last tip kind of bridges the gap to the final selection of things I wanted to talk about today, which are all related to actually taking in the information that you're reading, because again, I know it's so easy to physically read and then get to the bottom of the page, and this is something I talked about in the last video actually. Sometimes I'll be reading, and I will be reading the words and getting down the page, and then I'll get to the bottom of the page and think, well hang on, I haven't actually taken in anything I've just read, so I need to go back and start again. And that's not ideal. I think my one take-home tip is to really get to grips with the abstract of the study before you even move on to anything else. So just really sit with the abstract. Don't be afraid to read it a few times if you need to. Make sure you really understand that key bit of information at the beginning of the study, because if you do that, it's going to make it so much easier to comprehend and internalise everything that comes after it. Similarly, if you're an auditory learner and you do find it difficult to take in information through reading it, one thing you might like to do with the abstract is to use the voice notes on your phone and record yourself speaking the abstract out loud so that you can listen to it back. And you could listen to it back in that instance, but you could also listen to it back at different points in time if you feel like it's something that you need to go back to, either to help you get through the rest of the paper or just in your studies more generally. So just sit and speak it into your recording device, whatever you're using. Or if you really are strapped for energy, perhaps bribe a friend or a flatmate into doing it for you. They might be a drama undergraduate, they might just see it as a monologue opportunity, you never know, and you can always bribe them with biscuits. This next one might be a bit of a controversial one, but I'm saying it because I know I've been through it myself. I know when you're chronically ill, it just isn't possible to always keep on top of the workload that you're presented with as a student. And I do think that's a bit of a taboo subject, and I feel that's something that many people do feel ashamed of, but you shouldn't be, because remember that you're dealing with limited energy and that you're doing your best. So my next tip is, if you're presented with multiple research studies that you need to get through in a set period of time and you're worried about whether you're going to be well enough to get through them all, I personally think that really reading and understanding the abstract for each of those studies is much more important than trying to bulldoze through every single study and take in as much as possible whilst you're knowing that most of it is just going over your head or in one year and out the other. So I think that really knowing the abstract is actually, for multiple studies, is actually more beneficial than either knowing one study really well and in loads of depth, or just having a really light, hazy understanding of the different studies. I'm losing myself a bit here. If in doubt, prioritise the abstract. this is probably not going to happen on the regular, but if the academic paper that you're hoping to get through is a popular or well-known research study, it might be that there are research summaries available online. Yeah, so if it's a popular study, just have a look around on the internet, because somebody might have written a really concise research summary or broken it down into bullet points. There might be stuff out there that can help. And as a psychology student, again, I didn't find this at the time, which is really annoying, but something that I found after I've graduated, and something that I really love because it helps me to keep informed even though I'm not a student myself, is it's this resource called PsychCrunch, and it's run by the BPS, the British Psychological Society, and they have a podcast which talks about different topics and recent research that pulls into them, and they talk to subject experts about it. And they also have this newsletter and this research digest pulling on different research studies of interest and breaking them down into really accessible articles, so they don't feel as vigorous as reading an academic research paper. I find them much more digestible. So that's a really specific example, and obviously isn't going to be relevant for everybody. But I do think it's worth having a look in the subject you're studying and just seeing if there are any resources like that out there, because you never know. These things can be a game changer. And finally, a bit of a nice one to finish on is to not be afraid to just chat with your friends or the people you're studying with about what you're reading ahead of class. So even if you know that you're going to discuss the research paper in class or whatever work you're doing, don't be afraid to reach out to other people who are also doing the reading and just ask if they maybe fancy a bit of an informal chat about it. It can, one, motivate you to go through the research paper perhaps in a little bit more depth if you do feel up to it, and two, you might be able, through talking to somebody else, pick up on things that you yourself had missed but they had picked up on, and vice versa, of course. Talking to a friend can often be a little bit less energy consuming than trying to really cognitively focus on a research paper, but it can be as beneficial in actually taking in and internalising the information that's going to help you in your studies. And there we go. Okay, so those are some of my tips for academic reading with a chronic illness. I really hope they're somewhat helpful. I know it's such an individual thing and it really will vary depending on your symptoms and your condition, and also what you're studying and your learning styles. I really hope this is in some way helpful. And I've also just realised I haven't put my fairy lights on, but I think it's safer for everybody if I don't try and film this again. You're just going to have to imagine that the fairy lights are on. If you have any of your own tips for academic reading, please do feel free to share them because they might be helpful for somebody else. I should also plug as well that I wrote a book about being a chronically ill student. It's called University and Chronic Illness, a Survival Guide. It'll be linked below, and it covers all aspects of being a student, not just the studying, but also the independent living, managing your money, socialising, all the things that for so long have gone not talked about for students with chronic illnesses. So I'll leave that linked below in case it's helpful as well. Cheeky plug out of the way. Thank you so much for watching. You can subscribe if you want, and I will see you next time.